All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for being here today for our Lunch and Learn from the Lappin Weiser Center. This is one of the projects that the center is supporting, and we're very excited to share a little bit about what we've been doing on this project. It's still a work in progress, but we're excited to share from our first year experience. So thank you for being here. Make sure you get some snacks. And just to give a quick agenda, we're going to introduce our research team here in a minute. We're all sitting up front. Not quite everybody is here, so we'll mention those that are not. Share a little bit about the project, our current outcomes, and also our next steps. And we're happy to take any questions or any wonderings that anybody might have around the work that we're doing. So to get us started, we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. I will go ahead and start. My name is Liz Kolb, and I'm a clinical professor here in the teacher education program and in learning sciences. And I get to work with new and pre-service teachers on using technologies, which is a lot of fun for me. And that is a passion of mine and kind of what brought me to this project, which I'll share more about in just a few minutes. But I would like the rest of our research team that is here to go ahead and introduce themselves. And as you can see, we also have some fellows and students that may not necessarily be here with us today, but are here in spirit. And some have even exited our research team because they've gone on to exciting other projects and jobs of their own. So I'm going to go ahead and start right here with Tom. If you
All right.
wait, you have to use the microphone.
If you leave it on the table, though.
All right.
Yeah.
And I'm loud and obnoxious anyway, so everybody knows that. So my name is Tom Drake. I am a lecturer here in Ed Studies.
I'm Heidi Bennett. I'm the program manager for the center.
I'm Stephen Zhao. I'm from the data program, graduated last semester.
I'm Florida and Serena. I'm in the data program, and this is my second year. I'm the student fellow.
Go ahead and introduce yourself. Just go ahead and say your name and what program you're with.
Oh, okay. Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Dion, and I'm a master's student in education studies. And now I'm one of the student fellows in Learning Science Center.
Great. So this is very much a team effort, and not just here at the university, but we also have a wonderful advisory board that we've been working with. This is a pretty big and daunting project that we have tried to take on, and we recognize that we are by no means the experts in the room, and there's a lot of expertise out in the world, and so we have had the privilege of being able to draw upon these 7 individuals who have done a lot of work with education applications, evaluations of different ways of learning and thinking in the learning sciences. So we meet with our advisory board a couple of times a year to talk about updates and also just to get feedback about the work that we're doing and any other tips or ideas that we need to move forward with. So we just wanted to recognize that we are working beyond just the university with other partnerships too with this project. So we thought to warm up, we would actually have a little interactivity. So we just wanted to ask all of you that are in the room, when you are looking at an educational app, what kinds of key characteristics are you looking for when you look at it? Whether it's through the lens of being an educator, a teacher, maybe a parent, an aunt, an uncle. If you are going to be picking out an education app, what types of things do you look for when you're reviewing that app? Whether it's for math learning, literacy, science, I'm looking at Betsy back there, science, social studies, just general life skills. We're just curious to hear what are some different characteristics that you might be looking for or you would want reviewed in the app so that you know it would be quality for your students or your children that you're looking for with that. Excellent. Thank you. So many good characteristics that are in there, right? So you're looking at the feedback, the reporting, you're looking at manipulative design, right? What are some of the ads and kind of some of the lures that might be behind the scenes there as well. You're also thinking about the pedagogy, right? Like the pedagogical approaches that are put into that. content accuracy, what resources are being used? Are they valid? Are they reliable? Who created it? Is it a credible source or not? Accessibility features, right? Can all of my students actually fully access this, or is it going to be limiting to some? Age appropriate. Also, thinking about things like, is it healthy? Does it show learning progress? How does it show progress? These are great questions. Let me see if I can scroll down here a little. Right learning level, that just right zone of proximal development learning level for my child. Is it complementary with the curriculum I'm teaching? Because a lot of times it actually might do the opposite. If it's using different terminology, different definitions, that's really going to confuse your students or your children if they're using it at home and trying to make it work for their classroom. So there's so many great characteristics in here. Does anyone else have any other ones that weren't shared? So the reason why we asked this is also because this is a big reason why we're doing this particular project. One of the things that we know is that there are now over 400,000 applications labeled education in the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And as a parent, as a teacher, who has time to go through 400,000 applications to try to figure out which one is going to be just right for my child or for my students? And while there are some resources out there that are frameworks or guides or have evaluated these applications, and here's a few of them that are pretty common that are out there. What we found in our team, and what I have also found just in my last decade of doing this work with teachers and looking at education applications, is that they are very limited in what they are evaluating. So if I go to Common Sense, I'm going to get a fairly thorough review of privacy and safety, but I'm not going to get a lot of information about manipulative design or addictive features that might be in the app, or if there's discriminatory design within the app itself. If I go to Digital Promise, I'm going to learn about the pedagogical design that it's made with, but I'm not going to learn anything about privacy and safety. So each one of these has affordances and can be really useful, but for a comprehensive review of the app, I would have to go to probably 5 or 6 different places and read really big, dense reports to try to figure out what's going on with the apps. And one of the things that is frustrating is that as an everyday person, you don't have time to do this. As a teacher who's busy in their classroom, you don't have time to do this. As a parent, I'm a parent, I don't have time to do this with 400,000 apps that are out there. So our objective for our team is to try to develop a tool that would be comprehensive in evaluating educational apps, that would be something that puts out information that would be easy to digest for a parent, for a caregiver, or for a teacher. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So that's our objective, and it's a really big objective because there's a lot of different features that are important in apps. Now, as a team, when we started this project a year ago, we had maybe a general sense of what features might be important, but we wanted to actually know evidence-based wise what features are actually vital for our target audience. So we decided to focus in on caregivers and educators who work with children ages about 5 to 8, so kind of preschool through maybe 2nd grade. And we chose this because when we were looking at the education apps, we found the majority of educational apps are created for this age range, so there's just an abundance of them. We also saw that for young children below preschool age or young preschool, that there's a lot of concern over screen time use. So we didn't want to spend a lot of time with apps that probably wouldn't be recommended because children were not recommended to use screens that much at that age. So those were kind of the 2 reasons we started with this particular area. Most of these apps do focus on literacy and math, but there's all sorts of different content areas in here that are rich for us to take a look at. We're hoping eventually to extrapolate this to other ages as well. So our timeline for our project to create this consumer comprehensive tool is a 3-year project. So we started the project around last year, around this time, where we have just started to brainstorm and research, do a deep dive into frameworks that are out there to try to figure out what are the key characteristics that are evidence-based that we should be looking at in apps. And we were able to do that, and Heidi's going to share a lot more about what we found from last year in just a couple of minutes. But this year, now that we have designed a kind of draft tool that we are starting to work with, we are now in the testing phases where we are starting our beta testing this month of this draft tool, which is very exciting. We are hoping to eventually launch this tool sometime in 2026, 2027 in that year. So that's kind of where we are in our phases right now. So I'm going to hand this over to Stephen, and he's going to share a little bit about our research questions and what we've accomplished so far.
Okay. So our research question was focused on the first is what are the existing framework for 11-18 educational apps and who are their intended audience? And then we try to identify what characteristics define a high quality educational applications according to our searching about current evaluation frameworks, and try to find out what are the commonalities and gaps among these frameworks. And at last, we want to know how is each characteristic precisely defined based on the thorough review of the literatures. So our current steps for the past years and for this semester is we try to consult an advisory board of experts in the field of education applications and learnings. And during our first semester, we try to reviewing and annotating the current frameworks in evaluating educational apps. So looking for some specific characteristics of a high-quality app for the purpose of learning growth, and then try to define the characteristics of a high-quality application using some evidence-based sources. And then we consolidating references into a shared repository for easy access and citations, and also designing a draft rubric to quantify and evaluate app characteristics. And then we engaging the advisory board again to validate and refine definitions and evaluation methods, and try to do some additions or modifications to the frameworks. And we also do the survey this semester about of caregivers and educators, and also finalizing the protocols for the beta testing for now. And right now I got leave to Heidi to talk about like our current frameworks about.
I'm a lot shorter. Can you hear me? Okay. So I will try to remember all of the things that we did last year. But what we started with, and as Stephen and Liz mentioned, is we started by reviewing the existing frameworks, and we basically did a giant lit search. And so some of the things that we included in our literature search were journal articles that we were really trying to focus on articles that already offered some kind of evaluation of educational technology, and we tried to keep it in the target age range. A lot of the literature was like 0 to 8, so we did include younger target age ranges in the literature. We tried to find things that were grounded in the learning sciences and applicable to like the current market, so nothing that was really old. So the lit review took a while. We also excluded certain things if they lacked relevance to early childhood or primary education. If there was really no framework or no criteria for evaluating, we didn't spend too much time. And anything that was too narrowly focused, we excluded that from our review. The way we really started, though, was we started with these 4, we're calling them our 4 foundational frameworks, and these came from recommendations from our advisory board, and these 4 frameworks are the E-AIMS model, which was developed by the organization 0 to 3, the 4 pillars of learning, the 3 C's, which are now there's a new version called the 5 C's, but we started with the 3 C's, and then KidMap, which interestingly is not available anymore, but it was a really comprehensive checklist focused on diversity and bias in educational apps. So interestingly, it's no longer, the website is down. So Not sure about that. We also, so we started with those 4, and we read through them, and we pulled out what each framework was noting as like a important characteristic of a high-quality app for learning. And then we started spreading out, and we brought in some additional frameworks. You can see this whole list, but a lot of them were related to equity in educational tech, discriminatory design, accessibility, including universal design for learning. We also really wanted to look at safety and privacy. That's obviously a big concern. And we did try to get some information from Google Play has a teacher-approved app that they say these apps are evaluated by teachers, and we need someone who works for Google to give us more information, but we tried to find out as much as we could, like what they're using to evaluate. So these were the frameworks we reviewed, and after we just kept digging and digging, and it's like pulling on a thread, you know, you find one thing and then you would find another thing, we started making a giant list of like, what are the characteristics that are showing up repeatedly across these different frameworks and across these articles. And some of them didn't use the exact words, but we tried to group like concepts together. So the sort of 5 top characteristics that felt like they were showing up a lot were actively involved. And it's interesting because you all mentioned these in the Mentimeter. So right on. Actively involved, you know, meaning that the child is actively engaged both cognitively and physically with the content. Meaningful connections, meaning that the content relates to the child's life and there's like a knowledge transfer. Social interaction, meaning you're fostering some kind of interaction with another person or even perhaps a character in the app, some kind of parasocial experience. Accessibility, meaning, you know, anyone can use the app. And goal-focused, which we also refer to as free from distractions, which meaning there's not so many pop-ups and rewards and trophies that you forget why you're doing the activity to begin with. Some of the characteristics that showed up like in 1 or 2 frameworks but weren't really overlapping, but that we and the advisory board thought were important, were diversity, and that refers to just like representation of characters and stories in the app, but also how it's tested and used with users. So if you're a school teacher, are you using an app that was tested with a student population similar to yours, or is it completely different? We also incorporated bias because, as we all know, there's a lot of bias embedded in technology, and we thought it was important to have a critical view of that. Safety and privacy, I mentioned, that refers to both like paywalls and, you know, data privacy, but also we also integrate this addictive design, or addictive elements. It's called a lot of different things: manipulative design, dark patterns, addictive design, but it's these things in an app that keeps the child using the app for nefarious reasons, right? So they can make money or collect data or can lead to some kind of addictive behaviors. And one of the members of our advisory board referenced this, you know, talks about the importance of like also the mental health and the well-being of a child needs to be part of it. So adding this addictive elements aspect to our tool was really important. So then we made this really big chart of like most of the frameworks and then what evaluation characteristics appeared in each one. Don't strain your eyes. The main takeaway is there isn't one framework that includes everything. Surprise, surprise. So, but we were trying to figure out, you know, what was included in each framework. So the other thing we did was, as we made these lists of characteristics, then we realized, oh, well, we have to define what we mean. So we have a giant running list of definitions. And I will say that this is ongoing, and we continue to refine this. There isn't one place where there's a clear definition of every characteristic, so we continue to work on this and then also try to make sure we're citing where this definition is coming from or where we're getting the information. So I would click on this link, but it's real messy. You don't need to see it. So then, once we had our giant list of characteristics, then we thought, okay, now how do you measure this? Right? Like, how do we assess this? So we started a draft rubric, and this has gone through multiple versions. And what we ended up coming up with was sort of these, like, I think it's 8 broad categories. 8 broad categories of characteristics, and then so that means safety, navigation and accessibility, caregiver engagement, content. I won't read them all, but these kind of broad categories. And then within each one, there are things that we're measuring. And so we have worked on this rubric. We got feedback from our advisory board multiple times, and then the goal is to use this rubric to then test some apps and see how they score. And then even just figuring out the scoring has been hilarious because it's very all new to me. So just figuring out how do you score, feedback or distractions, like is it one ad is bad or 12 ads? Breaking that down has been very interesting. So that is the beginning of our rubric. And then our next step is to, like I said, test this rubric. So we've turned this into a really long Qualtrics survey. And our team has started by evaluating a few apps to see how this rubric actually works. And we'll have to report back to you at another time. But I think that is all that I have to say. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to talk about a different part of our research project.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. So as part of the work going back and forth between the literature and the expert advisory panel, we were tasked with trying to find some data, just a temperature check at what current working educators and parents are thinking about these things. So we conducted a survey that looked at all of the rubric elements that we had developed at the time for the evaluation tool. We aim to collect data from caregivers, so anyone who has a parenting role, and educators of children ages 3 to 13. The aim is really learning more about what elements in educational technology that they think are the most important, right? What do they value the most? In terms of recruitment, we used a snowball sampling approach, sending out links to the survey on social media feeds, email feeds, asking people to also forward to others who may be interested in providing us with information. We had about a 3-week time frame with which the survey was open, and respondents, had an inducement of being entered into a raffle for a $50 gift card. In addition to the asking teachers and our educators and caregivers to evaluate the importance of different rubric items, we also collected some basic respondent characteristics and had 2 open response items, which we'll discuss in a second. So we'll talk about the parents first, the educators, and then we'll do some comparison of these two. So we had 98 caregiver respondents, the majority of which were white and female, highly educated, with 92 identifying that they possess a bachelor's degree or higher, of an upper income level with 79 of the 98 identifying that they earn more than $100,000 in their household. Respondents were categorized into having children of different age groups. To do this, we used a median approach. We had parents or caregivers who responded having children that were 3 and children that were 12. A median seemed to be the most functional approach to trying to just gauge within those age groups. The majority of which did fall into the 5 to 8 age category, which was the primary focus of this work. So we have a full list of 25 rubric items. Here I've just placed the top 10, again sorted by the 5 to 8 age category. As you look at the table, you can definitely notice that there is some variation across these age groups. So parents with younger children tend to have some values that vary, right, from some of the older children. So ease of navigation is something that certainly child can navigate independently. For our individuals who are categorized and having children who were 9 or older, that was much more important. And having the child be able to navigate it for 3 to 4-year-olds was less important. And from that, we kind of posit that, there's a potential that parents expected to be really engaged with their younger children working through the apps and using them. Other elements, to Lauren's point earlier, right, app is free was very important. to parents. Other elements, not having any bias or stereotypes, which grows with importance for parents who have older children as those things become more prevalent in their day-to-day experience. Ensuring that there's minimal distractions was pretty even across the board. And of course, safety. Safety is a concern. So we are working on a set of results that we can put out more broadly, because I understand that this is not really readable in this moment, but you can kind of take a stand at how some things change and look differently by these different age categories. Some of the things that were also important, but not necessarily in the top 10, certainly things like supporting social interactions. And it's really important to identify that when we're talking about this, we're not talking about it's important that the app has supports for social interactions. It's important to the parents and to the educators that a rubric evaluating the app would talk about how this app engages in social interactions. And in fact, one of our open response findings was explicitly that. Like, the parent said, I rated this 5 of 5, not because I think it needs to have the social interactions, but because I want to know about it if it does, so I can be aware and be conscious about my child's safety and interactions with others independently. And that is kind of a contrast, right? So for those of us who are oriented towards the learning sciences, we understand the importance of social aspects of learning, right? So how do we think about these elements specifically as we're evaluating apps that are meant to support effective learning, but also need to be thinking about a different kind of space, right, for how you support social interactions and different ways of doing it. Similarly, did I say similarly? Similarly, our educators were also majority white and female. Most of the respondents were categorized into a K-5 teaching space. We had some individuals who worked in administration or in other kinds of educational roles. 76 were in public schools, 51 of which worked in suburban environments, with 14 each working in urban and rural schools. So, and here, these are not sorted by the different age groups, because there were multiple categories that contained children 5 to 8. But you can see some of the, variation in here. Again, safety is a very large concern. Cost, elements of content-appropriate design, clear learning goals, children can navigate independently, and we'll talk about how these contrast to some of the parent responses in a second. Again, apologize that that's not readable. We are working on a document to send out, but it can kind of give you, some variation as you can look across and see how people thought differently, specifically with, people who span the K-8 environment as opposed to people who were working specifically in early education. So given the nature of the data, as it was, very not diverse across many parameters, there was only really one way that we could start to think about anything that would draw a comparison. So we used a mean difference approach to really just compare educators and caregivers and how they thought about things. So displayed in this table, you have the top 6 items in terms of the difference, the mean difference value that were significant. The 7th item at the bottom is the only item that was significant where parents actually rated it higher than educators. And as I've continued to think about this, some of the things that I found really important, I think, have made me come to a conclusion that both in terms of thinking of ourselves as educators, thinking of ourselves as scholars in these kinds of spaces, we could be doing a better job of communicating to parents what elements of learning or strategies of learning that might be present in apps or should be present in apps are things that will actually help their child further their development academically. Because as we look down this list, the highest items that we're talking about is standards-based education, modifications for students with disabilities, many of which before age 8 are not going to be diagnosed for a lot of different reasons. Elements of having direct feedback and activity reports, and support for multiple languages. One item here that was definitely a little disheartening was the characters resemble the child, which is something, as someone who also works in a critical space, having representation within the media elements that children are using is remarkably important. I also note that the element of bias was also a primary focus of the parents, right? So that made me feel a little bit more comfortable, especially when we consider that the majority of parents responding here are white parents who are highly educated and, are also valuing not having elements of stereotypes or bias within these tools. So it made me feel a little bit more comfortable. They recognize there's a lot of overrepresentation of whiteness in a lot of different forms of media. So that may not actually be the disheartening, piece of data that I originally thought it was. And I also did find the child's enjoyment element to be quite interesting. One, as I think all of us as educators can do more to think about joy as a tool for motivation in this process. But also in our conversations with our advisory panel, this has been one of the hardest things to define. How do we define a child's joy in terms of using an application or an educational interface? As I discussed before, there were 2 open response items as part of the survey. One was asking other important items that people could speak to. So this is actually an example of one of the parent responses. This is what I had mentioned earlier. I'm rating, 5 out of 5 for social interactions. Doesn't mean that it's important that they have these capabilities, but I need to know about it, right? An educator response example. I don't trust an app that's going to be very effective at making real-world connections or supporting SEL skills. Maybe I'm missing something, but outside of using something like Google Suite for interactions, I don't really trust it. They were also asked to provide any details or feedback on what they would like to see in a one-page report. So our ultimate goal is that we can get this rubric into a space where we can have a one-page PDF that goes to a parent. They can look at it and make an assessment of whether this is going to be a good support for their child. And here is some basic details, statistics on how children benefit from educators, not wanting to add to screen time without having a learning outcome that was positive. Parents and caregivers, teacher testimonials and feedbacks on the app's value. For the first open response item, we did do a qualitative analysis, just again contrasting, different opinions between the caregivers and educators. And here, again, caregivers were really emphasizing elements of cost, usability, intuitive design that allows children to navigate independently. Educators were really prioritizing instructional relevance and curriculum alignment, reinforcement of learning objectives, right? Things that, as part of their job, they're gonna need, if they're putting a tool and spending time, that's classroom time, with the child, these are the things they need to be prioritizing to make sure they're helping to move the child forward. So, with that, I am gonna pass back to Liz.
All right, we just wanted to finish up before any questions, just letting you know where we are with our next steps. Clearly, we have a lot of work that we're doing, and we keep saying it's kind of messy, but starts to come together a little bit, which is exciting. We're currently finishing up our alpha testing now with just our research group, and we'll be expanding our group with beta testers starting at the end of this month. If anybody does have interest in being one of our beta testers, you can definitely reach out to me and let me know. And our advisory team will be meeting again in November to kind of hear our updates and see what's going on with that. We also have a few things that we are dreaming of. So these are conversations that we've had throughout the research process, as we get the survey results and the data from that, as we are reading through articles and hearing from advisory board, as well as caregivers and educators, and just the sign of the times that we're in with artificial intelligence. So a few things that are on our big dream list that one day we would hope this would become. We would like this to become some kind of searchable database, not where you just go and you get a report like you do at some other sites, because we're living in a time where people want it to be very personalized to what characteristics they're looking for and what they want. So we want it to be set up so that I can search for certain characteristics and it will pop up different applications that would make sense for those particular characteristics, or vice versa, search an application based on certain characteristics to see what is out there. And kind of, as Tom said, not necessarily rating everything kind of good, bad, but rather making sure that information is there, but in a succinct way that makes sense and is very easy to read and easy to glean. So we are hoping that will happen eventually. The other thing is that we recognize there's 400,000 plus tools out there. We cannot evaluate those by hand as humans. We just cannot do that. So this is where artificial intelligence hopefully will come into play. And once we do get our rubric up and running and validated, hopefully, we are looking to use AI to support and streamline the evaluation process. And we are already in conversations with some people here at the U to develop that tool so that we can actually evaluate a lot of applications in a much more efficient and shorter amount of time and have a little less human capacity around that. And then finally, we are hoping to connect with education application vendors at a certain point to invite them to have these deep evaluations of their tool in hopes that maybe they will also receive maybe more detailed reports than what the public is getting about what holes they might have in their tool or what things they might want to think about that they haven't necessarily addressed for a better learning outcome and just a better overall outcome for what caregivers and teachers really want in their tools. So we're hoping that we can work with the vendors to provide them with feedback so that hopefully and eventually they will be making tools that provide a lot more educational value and maybe not just focus on the monetary part for them. So those are kind of some of our big dreams that we have for this team that we're not at yet, but we're hoping in a little while down the road that we will be much closer to that. So that is all we have right now, which actually feels like a lot. Oh, we do have a few publications, one under review for AERA with the work that Tom is leading on the survey data, and then we do have a piece that just came out with ASCD with the practitioner piece on kind of what we found so far. So we are trying to also get some information out there. One of the other things that I should have put in, I should have put in the big dreams that I didn't, is that we're also just thinking about ways to disseminate the information that we're finding. And we're hoping, since our goal is to talk to the everyday person, that we're not thinking about big reports and big journal articles. While that will kind of happen behind the scenes a little, we're really thinking more about the fact that this generation of caregivers, especially for younger children, are of the Gen Z generation, where they don't necessarily want to read a big report, right? They want to see maybe a 1-minute TikTok reel about what's going on, what key characteristics should I choose, or maybe it's something that's fed through Instagram in a really creative way. So we are thinking about how we can utilize kind of more current and trendy tools and ways that maybe influencers work, and even connecting with some influencers around how to get this information out in ways that make sense for this generation of parents and also the newer generation of educators that we are creating here at the U that maybe would take up this information better if it was kind of in these short reels rather than, and since reels can be very addictive, maybe they'll be addicted to our characteristics. So we're thinking about that too, as how to be a little more creative. So again, if anyone has ideas or is interested in the work that we're doing, you can always reach out to me. We are very open to that. Otherwise, does anyone have any questions for our team up here, the work that we're doing?
Thank you. Do you have a sense of how many apps parents, caregivers would use versus educators? That I'm thinking in school, there's curriculum. And do teachers use apps in school? I don't know. I mean, I was just curious. But I would think the caregivers would use them more frequently than the educators. Do you have any sense of that from what you were doing?
I think that's a great question, but it's not a question we surveyed our families about.
I have what my kids do, right? Like they have apps that are part of their curriculum.
They're part of the curriculum.
Yeah. And the teachers will build in content or select from content to plan out some of the work they're doing.
Is that working? Yeah. Okay. I will say that on a teacher perspective, like we use apps all of the time. They're just worked into our curriculum. So like today, we used Kahoot, right? That counts as an app, and we turned it educational based off of, the questions we were asking the students. Like the FET labs, we use those all of the time. So those technically count as apps. There's Power Up, and then a lot of the times, so teaching in a science, curriculum, a lot of the times if they have free time, I have them working on a game that's technically fun, but still is related to content. So I will say on a teacher side, we use them for everything.
Yeah.
Not in the district that I work in. Teachers tell me I've got 2 years to retirement. You want me to change?
That's the difference. You're looking at the
Right. I mean, but that's really a powerful issue.
Yeah.
Right. They're not going to retire, right? But it's the Gen Z, it's the alphas, it's whatever. It's fascinating. Okay.
I think. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
A lot of that came into play too with COVID when a lot of districts got funding for one-to-one technology. So students had the ability to have a more easy access, balanced access to technology inside and outside of the classroom, which is when I think a lot of these apps might have exploded because teachers realized that it's not just in my 50 minutes, I can also offer opportunities for students to use outside of the classroom as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of tension there because the funding is gone, right? So all this funding that schools got for tools, for technology has disappeared. And so there is a lot of tension around, do we now spend our general funds for these tools and technology? And they're also thinking about what's the most useful, like what actually worked for us and what did we waste our money on? And so they're trying to figure that out. And then kind of as Dr. Soloway was saying too, then we have this tension around we're feeding a lot of different apps to teachers and they don't all work together because they're individual companies that are trying to make a profit. And so they don't necessarily want to work with another company because they want to make the profit. So, even in Ann Arbor Public Schools, they have Schoology and they have Power School, which were supposed to work together, but they don't. And so it's just caused a lot of frustration among teachers now that they have to put everything in 2 different places rather than just an old school grade book, which might be easier in some ways. So there's a lot of tension, and a lot of it comes down to profit and people wanting to make a profit off of schools with this. Betsy.
This is so cool. Thanks, y'all. It's really, really exciting to hear what you've been up to for the last year, so thank you for this. I'm thinking about parallels with Ed Reports, which reviews curriculum materials across different content areas. People have different perspectives on Ed Reports. Some love it, some hate it. That's fine. But one of the things that Ed Reports does is they have a kind of a gatekeeping kind of, not in a super negative way, but they have you have to be above threshold with regard to, in their case, it has to be, the curriculum materials have to be aligned to the standards. They have to be able to pass that bar of being aligned to the standards in order to get a full review. I'm wondering if a technique like that might reduce the human need. Like if you say safety is our number one thing, and if the app doesn't reflect safety, however you're defining it in your rubric, then we're not going to even bother to review do the rest of the rubric. Just a possibility, and it might not be safety, it might be something else, might be your has to do this in order to warrant full review. Just might be a way of streamlining. That 400,000 number is really striking. So,
No, that's a great suggestion. I love that, Betsy. So thank you. I mean, this is why we're doing this too, because we are open to ideas, and I think that's a great one. And I know that some of the other, Digital Promise, kind of has a gatekeeper type thing for theirs too. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I like that idea. All right, and then Nate.
Yeah. This is super exciting. I've been really interested in this since it got announced very early on as part of the seed projects for the Learning Science Center. I'm a parent of a kid in this age range and a respondent to the survey. So yes, super interested and work with students here on campus on EdTech innovation. So it's just this really great coming together. I have a couple questions, but I'm just gonna ask one and step back and leave space for others, but I'll ask more if there's time. Use of AI in the educational apps, is that something that is captured by one of your categories, or did you consider that? So thinking of it as a metric for assessing, not as not with sort of a judgment bias, but just saying their AI is being used in this app to respond to your child's prompts, to assess different parts of their interactions.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm sure that most even, I don't know, are using AI to some extent.
Yeah.
So that's my first question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say yes and no. We don't have a specific question that says, is AI, part of this app? We do look at things like adaptive software, which uses a ton of AI. So we do look at, does it include that kind of feature in it? But I think that's a great notice that, we don't have that category. And I think maybe one of the reasons we don't, as I'm just thinking about it here, and I can let my panel also jump in, is that a lot of the literature we reviewed and the frameworks we reviewed came out kind of generative AI. And so they probably weren't thinking that much about it either. So that's a great thought.
And I'll just say, a lot of students that I work with, AI is a part of almost every EdTech innovation that we're seeing to some extent, and many of them have to do with prompt response, interactions with avatars, with often there's social emotional learning components to it, which that's very fraught space. But when it comes to AI, but it's seems like it's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say we hint around it. We talk about parasocial and other things, but we don't actually specifically ask it. So it's something we should consider. I don't know, does anyone else on the panel want to speak to that?
No, I'm just thinking about it because we haven't had those conversations. I think there's a multitude of concerns around it. One is depending on what framework for Gen AI you're using. Is it, one of the larger service companies? Is it a closed environment that they've modeled, refined a model that's going to be appropriate and aligned to the developmental stages that they're intending to serve? It is definitely a big question. I think the other part of it that comes into me is also, you were talking about the safety issue, and safety for us is one that I think we're struggling with, and we're honestly trying to rely on other resources because we don't, there's so many different elements to it. There's very obvious social interactions, those kinds of things that may happen, people trying to connect with younger children, et cetera. But there's also, elements of data privacy. And I don't know that it'd be a much even more intensive review process if we were trying to go line by line to see how data is being used in the code. Right. Thinking about the AI function of it, I think one of the things we will want to consider in that privacy front is how is the data being sent to the language model, right? And how restricted is the access to that language model? If it's something like, ChatGPT, where it's a big open public service, there's going to be a lot more room for error potentially.
Yeah, thanks. It's a good suggestion. Was there a hand over here? I saw one. No? Yes.
This is all cool work, so thank you guys. It's a really fascinating project. And my kids also fall under the age group between 3 to 8. So I think I just wanted to say that, like, for me, when I look, and the safety was what I was really interested in, and there have been several questions about that. So I was curious, like, within the safety aspect, have you considered, like, online versus offline apps? Because as a parent, that's the first thing I see if my kids are like, oh, I want to install this app. Okay, let me see. So that is how I prioritize safety is it's not online, so they can chat with random people who are like on that app. And that brought up the interesting question that you also had about social interactions. I think how I try to, a lot of times, they come up, oh, my friends are using this, so I want to be on it so I can, do this at the same time and collect these prizes. I'm not there yet, so I try to explain them. But again, there's like other apps that especially they use at school, like Lexia, and all of those. They have like a certificate that you can print. So that is what I recommend. And also coming to your question that you had, like, I always try to use the same app that the schools are using. So I feel like the learning continues because with the new learning app, they have to start from the beginning, but the school app kind of mimics and they can start from where they're already at and it assesses their level. So I just want to share that. I thought that was really interesting.
No, I think that's really helpful, and it's why we definitely want parent input too and caregiver input because I do think, from what we've even seen from our survey results, that caregivers are often looking for things that maybe are a little bit different than what our educators are looking for. And we had not talked about, because as Tom said, we had been leaning on some more third parties who've done safety checks. We haven't necessarily looked specifically if there's the offline option or if everything has to be online and you could be interacting with others. So that's something for us to note too. I can tell Heidi's taking like great notes today with all these suggestions. So thank you for sharing that.
Lorena, did you have a question still?
First of all, I wanted to say it's very interesting. I guess I have a question in terms of like, what are you planning if you're planning to find more information with maybe parents that are uneducated or other types of demographics, because what you were saying at the end about making videos and maybe more accessible content, I think it's great for parents that maybe don't have the access to a journal. They can just be accessing this content, but also getting their perceptions, I think would be interesting to like complement and like see whatever like makes more sense to have like a more equitable approach. Yeah. And the other thing that I just wanted to comment on really fast was about joy. I wonder if there's differences in joy between preschool, elementary, and the older ones, because also school has a different approach to joy as you get older and like more focused on content. And so I just wonder, because I feel like that's another thing that could be very interesting.
Thank you for that, for all of that. And we would definitely, I mean, it's a discussion we've had with our survey. We kind of threw it together fairly quickly. And so we definitely want to get a more diverse sampling of caregivers as well as teachers too. So yes to that. Absolutely. We're very well aware of our lack of diversity in our sampling. And as for joy, that's been a big struggle, as has been mentioned, that our advisory team has also talked a lot about joy, and we've tried to figure out how do we measure joy? So it's an interesting idea to think about. Maybe it's looked at in different, developmental phases. So thank you for sharing that too. Does our team, anyone else want to share anything before we close? All right. Well, I just want to thank you for coming. I know we're kind of at the end of time, but thank you for coming and listening, and also for your suggestions and ideas. As I said, we are very open to it, so please do feel free to reach out if you have anything else on mind related to this, and we'll try to update maybe a year from now and see where we're at. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take snacks.
Yes.